And the red light's on. We're live.
Thank you. Good evening. I'd like to call the meeting to order and welcome you to the regular meeting of the Milwaukee Planning Commission. Agendas and staff reports are available on the city website at www.milwaukeeoregon.gov. The easiest way to locate them is to navigate to the community calendar where tonight's meeting page is posted. If you've not reviewed the agenda, it contains important information about the process that we follow. If you wish to be included in the mailing list for a decision, or if you wish to provide public comment, please log into the Zoom meeting using the link on the meeting page at the city website. In order to be included in the meeting record, public comments must be received during the applicable portion of the meeting. That is, general comments must be made during the open audience participation portion of the meeting, and comments on specific agenda items, public hearings, or work sessions must be made before the close of the public testimony portion of the agenda item. We will follow the basic format listed on the agenda. It includes all the hearing procedure steps. We may vary from the process based on the specific circumstances of each hearing. We do not have any previous meeting minutes to approve. I think I'm correct in that statement. Okay. So at this point, let me ask the staff, is there any informational items that they would like to bring up?
I have two items that I want to tell everyone about. The first is again, I've announced this before, but the council is planning on opening their hearing on the comprehensive plan on June 2nd. So hopefully the way this will work is on June 2nd, they will take testimony. On June 9th, which would normally be our planning commission meeting, but we are canceling the planning commission meeting. On June 9th, the council will reconvene for deliberation. And if all goes well, they would adopt on June 16th. I have heard from one counselor that they think that is a very aggressive schedule, but we will see how it plays out. The other item that I wanted to raise was next week, Chair Massey and I will be participating in interviews for the Planning Commission, the vacant Planning Commission seats. I think it's next week, isn't it, Robert?
It's just the 21st.
Yeah. So those are our updates.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Denny, is that for both open seats?
Well, there's 2 open seats and there's 6 candidates right now.
The answer is yes. Yeah. Any other informational items, Denny?
No, that's it.
Okay, thank you. This is an opportunity for the audience to comment on any items that are not on tonight's agenda. We have one item on tonight's agenda, and we'll have opportunity for that to be discussed later. But this is for the audience, the public, to comment on any other item. So if you wish to comment on an item that's on the agenda, there'll be plenty of time. So I would ask at this point, does anyone in the audience wish to comment on an item that's not on tonight's agenda? So if so, please raise your hand in the Zoom feature to indicate that you wish to make a public comment. And once you're unmuted, please remember to state your name and address for the record. Do we have anyone who signed in, Brett?
We have 2 attendees right now, but no, we have 1 attendee on the phone, and I'm not sure if a phone call coming in can in fact raise their hand. So I think we need to allow this person to talk and see whether they want to testify.
Okay, I've allowed them to talk.
They're still muted. Still muted. I can't seem to unmute. Brett, can you do that? Can you unmute that?
Yeah, I'm trying. Oh, wait.
There we go.
Yeah.
So whoever just phoned in, did you want to speak on the hearing item tonight or on public testimony? Just general comments.
This is Gary Klein, and I want to talk on the subject tonight.
Okay, so we will put you back on mute for a little while, and then when the time is right in the hearing, we'll bring you back in.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, I'm going to mute him again. And then we also have, I believe, the applicant, Jeff Sturgis. Just want to confirm that, Jeff, you're with us, and we'll promote you to a panelist when it's time for the applicant testimony for the hearing. Does that sound all right?
Yes, sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Okay, the next item on the agenda tonight is public hearing on the Riverway Lane vacation rental. And I'll call that to order at this point. The purpose of this hearing is to conduct the application number CU-2020-001. The purpose of this application is to request a conditional use on property located at 10707 Southeast Riverway Lane. In this case, the applicant has the burden of proving that the application is consistent with the City of Milwaukee's zoning and subdivision ordinances, comprehensive plan, and any applicable municipal code provision, and the proposal conforms with all the city's applicable criteria. I would now ask for the staff to cite the zoning ordinance sections where the criteria can be found.
All right, thank you. The applicable sections are Section 19.302, medium and high density residential zones, including the R2 zone. Section 19.401, Willamette Greenway Zone. Section 19.402, natural resources. Chapter 19.600, off-street parking and loading. Chapter 19.700, public facility improvements. Section 19.905, conditional uses. And Section 19.1006, type 3 review.
Thank you. So when we start the testimony, all testimony evidence must be directed toward the applicable substantive criteria. Failure to address a criteria or raise an issue with sufficient detail to allow the Planning Commission an adequate opportunity to respond to each issue precludes appeal to the City Council based on that issue. Failure to raise constitutional or other issues related to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient detail to allow a response precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Any party withstanding may appeal the decision of the Planning Commission to the City Council. Persons withstanding are those who submit written comments or testify online or by logging on to the Planning Commission's Zoom meeting through the city calendar or the city website. I will recognize those persons who either speak up on phone or raise their hand in the Zoom feature to indicate that you wish to testify. And once you're muted, please remember to state your name and address for the records so that they may be entered into the minutes. If you testify, please remember to confine your remarks to the application and the relevant criteria and avoid repetition and irrelevant information. If additional documents or evidence are provided by any party, the Commission may, if requested, allow a continuance or leave the record open to allow the parties a reasonable opportunity to respond. Any such continuance or extension shall be subject to the limitations of the 180-day rule unless the continuance or extension is requested or agreed to by the applicant. So at this point, I would like to get some feedback from the commissioners. Basically, does any member of the Planning Commission wish to abstain from this hearing?
No.
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 I have 4 no's. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to declare an actual or potential conflict of interest?
No.
No.
No. Commissioner Hemer, I didn't hear you.
No.
Thank you. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to report on an ex parte contact? Please let me know so now. No, and no ex parte contacts have been indicated. Will any commissioner who's visited the site prior to the hearing please raise their hand just in the video? feed like I have done. Okay. So we have one commissioner who's visited the site. Is that correct? Okay. Did any of the commissioners who visited the site speak to anyone at the site or note anything different from what is indicated in the staff report? Since I was the only one who indicated that I visited the site, my answer is no. Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the participation of any member of the Planning Commission?
I've just unmuted both the attendees.
No. That was Gary Klein.
Jeff Sturgis.
Thank you. Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission to hear this matter?
No, Gary Klein.
No, Jeff Sturgis.
Thank you for both of you. Let's proceed to the staff report presentation.
All right. Let me share my screen. All right. So, good evening, Chair Massey, Commissioners. I'm Brett Kelver, Associate Planner with the City of Milwaukee, and I'll be walking us through this application tonight. It's a conditional use review for establishment of vacation rental, the property at 10707 Southeast Riverway Lane. Just as a quick background or setup, wanted to point out that vacation rental is a particular type of commercial lodging that's allowed in all residential zones as a conditional use. So it's not an outright permitted use. It does have to go through Planning Commission review to be established regardless of the zone. And I've included here on the slide the code definition of vacation rental. And I wanted to just point out a couple of things here. So it is something that's conducted within what we understand to be a housing unit. So it could be an apartment, it could be a house, it could be one of two duplex units being rented out to a single party. It is a short-term type of rental. That is rented out for periods less than 30 days. But one of the keys that distinguishes vacation rental from just a short-term rental is that there are basically no primary occupants at the housing unit. That is that people don't live there most of the time as their permanent residents, and that timeline is established by saying you don't live there you have to live there at least 270 days of the year, or 9 months out of the year. If you don't live there, then it's considered to be no primary occupants, and that is how a vacation rental would be established. And one of the differences from, let's see, advance here. I guess what I want to say is to compare the code definition of a short-term rental. It's also rented for periods of less than 30 days, but the short-term rental is understood to be kind of an accessory use of a primary housing unit. That is, the owner does live there for at least 9 months out of the year, at least 270 days per year. The owner may not be in the housing unit when guests or lodgers are there. That would be unhosted, or they may, their arrangement may be that they're able to be there. Maybe they have an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit, or maybe it's a room in the house and they're on the site at that time. So a vacation rental is similar to a short-term rental in terms of its duration. The difference is with the vacation rental, it's not the primary home of the owners, the occupants. And then there's also a bed and breakfast function that is understood to be potentially multiple parties, so maybe up to 3 different parties staying in a housing unit. But I think the understanding is it actually is a hosted thing. The owner operator of the bed and breakfast is there. They're usually providing some kind of food service, but the stays are of short duration. So returning to the issue of the the vacation rental, I wanted to point out that as a conditional use, the conditional use code does provide a couple of requirements. If you do get approved for your vacation rental as a conditional use, the first thing that you have to do is you do have to work with our building official to make sure that the actual physical space, that housing unit itself does meet all the current codes. So all the fire and life safety standards, making sure you have egress windows, making sure that everything's up to code. So that's something that would need to be done before the first time the vacation rental is operated. And then the second requirement is actually kind of an ongoing one, and that is as a short-term rental, as a form of commercial lodging, vacation rental, the operator is required to get a business registration or pay a business tax to the city every year. And the code spells out that in conjunction with that annual renewal, both the first-time filing and the annual renewal of the business license for the vacation rental, the operator does have to do a couple things. They have to send a notice to their neighbors within 300 feet that provides information about the property owner's contact, how people can get a hold of them. If there is a separate operator or property manager, that contact information needs to be provided. And every year this notice also needs to just remind folks what the non-emergency number is for the Milwaukee Police Department. So the general idea there is that there's every year there's a kind of refreshing of appropriate contact information so that neighbors who are within the area know who to get in touch with if there start to be issues in terms of the performance of the vacation rental. So those are all things that are requirements if approved as a conditional use, the vacation rental. So our particular site, 10707 Southeast Riverway Lane, I just want to quickly explain to you what's happening here. It is, for a long time, was a single-family residence, so just a regular house that has recently been converted into a duplex. So there's basically a main floor with kitchen facility and a basement, basically a daylight basement unit with its own kitchen facility has been officialized at this site. So there's actually no physical construction that's going to happen as part of the establishment of the vacation rental. Basically, the vacation rental unit would happen in the upstairs or main floor of it, and then the applicant has proposed to use the daylight basement unit as a long-term rental. So having someone kind of around the year on a long-term basis be present there at the site. And the applicant can explain a little bit more about their kind of any details about their management proposal or what they expect. If my understanding is that it may be that the long-term renter may be pretty involved in the kind of in the management, the ongoing management of the vacation rental. So the applicant can explain a little bit more about how accountability will be provided there. And the site, the structure does include a 2-car garage, and the proposal is to just make it clear that one of the spaces inside the garage will be available for the long-term rental, and one of the spaces will be available for people using the vacation rental. There's also, as you can see from the aerial photo, quite a bit of parking area in front, kind of outside the garage in the area. Just now backing up a little bit to just let everyone know where the site is. I've circled it in red. So it's kind of the southwestern or western corner of the city. You can see this is near where the Johnson Creek kind of comes out and joins the Willamette River near on Riverway Lane. Here's an aerial view of it. I've highlighted the subject property in yellow here. So some other features you can kind of see: downtown Milwaukee and Highway 99E. This is 17th Avenue, and the MODA insurance office with its parking lots, and there are a couple of different apartment complexes and some other single-family residences here along. This is Lava Drive and Riverway Lane. Zooming in just a little bit more, you can see just a little bit more detail about some of the apartments and condominiums that are in the area. And what I think it's kind of interesting, here we are at City Hall, and on an aerial map, it looks like it's actually really close. But between Highway 99E, Johnson Creek, and just the access to this site is back through 17th Avenue down Lava Drive into Riverway Lane. So we're close as the crow flies, but it's not quite as direct to get there from downtown. Real quickly too, I just wanted to show you what the zoning is in this area. So interestingly, the MODA site is zoned for downtown mixed use, and then kind of part of this area where, you know, again, the creek is coming through. This is zoned as downtown open space, but the rest of the surrounding area is actually zoned for kind of a higher density residential use. It's zoned R2, and as I noted, there's a mix of different housing types here between apartments and single family houses in the area. So the staff report for this proposal did kind of raise a single key issue, really, and that was, you know, are there impacts that are going to be presented by the establishment of a vacation rental at this site that cannot be mitigated somehow, or that won't be mitigated or addressed in terms of you know, by the nature of how the vacation rental would be operated. I'm showing you here a street view. Again, you can see here the attached garage, the two-car garage, and the parking area out in front. And I'm going to just show you a couple of other street views. So here you can just see in this image, you can see the kind of the corner of the garage that's part of the vacation rental property. And this is looking kind of southeast towards the end of Riverway Lane. This shot here is just a little bit farther back, but still generally looking southeast as you're approaching the property, just to show you a little bit about what the nature of the kind of the immediate neighborhood here is. And then flipping it around just a little bit, this is kind of, again, if you're approaching the vacation rental, which is right here, from the dead end part of Riverway Lane coming back to the northwest to get back out of this cul-de-sac area. Here's the vacation rental, and then you turn the corner a little bit and see Riverway Lane extending back out to Lava Drive. So our assessment of the issues involving impact potential for the vacation rental, acknowledging that you know, just by the nature or the quality of activity at the site will be different than if it was either a kind of a long-term rental or just, you know, regular property owner occupied site. Obviously, as a vacation rental, there is a little bit of a commercial aspect. There would be, you know, different parties coming to that site over the course of time. So neighbors in that area would obviously notice different vehicles and, you know, unfamiliar vehicles. But in terms of the space that's available for parking at the site, and some of the aspects of their proposed management, the applicant explained in their application about having an established relationship with maintenance folks, having kind of Wi-Fi cameras set up so they can do some monitoring, establishing some limits in their kind of proposed operation of it so that they're limiting party size. I think, and the applicant can speak a little bit more about this, and I think the intent is to, you know, there's a lot of investment of time and kind of personal history at this particular site by the applicant. It's you know, for several decades has been the residence of the applicant's family, and so they're pretty aware of and sensitive to just the sense of neighborhood that's there. And what was explained in the application was a real interest and desire to try to make this be kind of as seamless a transition in the use of the property as possible, and trying to respect the privacy and the neighborhood feel of this area. So the staff's conclusion with the materials that were presented by the applicant was that there really were no significant impacts that wouldn't be addressed by the applicant's proposed operation of the vacation rental. One of the things that we did look at was that obviously there's a lot of pavement, for better or worse, in the front yard area of this site. That can kind of cut both ways, I guess. On the one hand, it provides ample room for the folks, whether they're guests of the long-term renter or folks using the main floor unit as a vacation rental. There's plenty of room for folks to park on the site and not impede traffic. Otherwise impede traffic on Riverway Lane. At the same time, one could note, well, there's a lot of room for a lot of people to park on that site. And so I think between the applicant's proposal to limit the party size and the the requirement of the duplex establishment to try to recover a little bit of the driveway area with some landscaping and making it clear that it's not all intended to be used for parking or maneuvering. The main condition that we proposed was to establish some additional landscaping. That is, I'm trying to shoot here, like basically to plant a tree. I think the idea was to plant one tree on each side of the driveway just to provide a little bit more screening from neighboring properties and a little bit of shade for that parking area as well. So that was staff's assessment of the issues. I want to just quickly look at the approval criteria for conditional uses. There are 7 of them. I've highlighted a couple of the ones that seemed more germane to this particular proposal, looking at the suitability of the site for the vacation rental use and how it was going to be operated with an eye towards compatibility to the other residences in the area. We've already talked a little bit about some of the potential impacts and how the applicant has proposed to manage those. Those seem to me to be the kind of those among those first 4 of the 7 criteria seem to be the ones that were most relevant to the consideration of this application. But these are the criteria that you should keep in mind as you're hearing additional testimony, hearing from the applicant, as you're discussing and deliberating amongst yourselves in terms of whether there's any, whether the proposal meets these criteria, whether there might be some additional conditions that would be necessary for approval. So with that, I'll just kind of transition out to a reminder of your options. We prepared some recommended findings and conditions of approval based on the testimony here tonight and your discussion. You may decide that you want to make some modifications to those, and that's something we can certainly do. You do have the option of continuing the hearing if you feel like there's more information that you need for your decision that's not available tonight. We do have certainly have time, I think, to get through another planning commission hearing if needed, and still allow time for any potential appeals to city council. It's July 10th is the deadline for an ultimate decision by the city on this. If you do feel strongly that the application should not be approved, we did not prepare findings for denial, but we could certainly take direction from the commission and return to you with some, if needed, return to you with some findings for denial. So with that in mind, I think I will stop and I'll ask if anyone has questions. I'll continue to share the screen in case it's useful to look at any of the images that I presented. If you'll just let me know, I'll navigate through there.
So do any of the commissioners have clarifying questions for the staff?
I have a question.
Yes, Vice Chair Lynch, what's up?
Brett, is the site managed locally, or is there a project management organization that oversees the site?
I think I'll let I don't know for sure. I'll let the applicant speak more to that when they give their testimony. My understanding is that there are family members who do live in the region who could be involved if need be. And again, I'm not sure what the intended relationship will be of the long-term renter in the downstairs. I had the impression earlier that they would maybe be involved in kind of helping manage some of that. But I think I'll let the applicant speak more to that question.
Okay, and a follow-up question would be, does the city have any requirements set around property management?
I think it's fair to say no. I mean, there's nothing in the code, I think, that sets any specific standards or requirements for property management in terms of, I guess, the context you're asking, like professional property management or that kind of thing. I mean, I think the larger net of requirements, I guess, would kind of fall more into the things that have been identified in the city code as nuisances, things that people could make a complaint about and get or expect some city response for with respect to noise, failure to maintain landscaping so that, grass gets over a certain height, light issues, that kind of thing.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hemer?
So could you please explain what the 300-foot rule means and what is the closest property? For example, MODA, the building itself may be 300 feet away, but the parking lot certainly is probably within the 300 feet. And maybe one building of Waverly Greens, which is the apartment complex over there, might be within 300 feet. But does that mean that you have to tell the whole entire apartment complex? How does that work?
Yeah. Let's see. I'm not sure that I could deftly get to the public notice map. The map that was included with the public notice that was mailed 20 days before the hearing included a graphic that showed kind of the area of properties that were included in this. And I don't have a good memory of it myself, but I could look for it maybe on the side. I think that, I think it would capture certainly the properties. This is Gary Klein's property, certainly to the end of Riverway Lane, and I believe up to the end here where it intersects with Lava Drive. As it hits different particular units, I think the way we've been addressing it, it may depend a little bit, and I'd have to double check back to see how specific the addressing is that we have in the kind of the county assessor's records for this, about which particular units might get the notice.
Right, because my question, the ones on the river, I believe, are condos, which are probably owner occupied. Mm-hmm. But I think those inner ones are rented or owned by Waverly, or however they work their system. My question comes, I know why we noticed it to tell the neighbors where the noise is. So the question comes to me, do we need to notify a business? Or do we need to, maybe if we decide not to notify a business, or do we notify an apartment complex, not each individual unit?
Right. It may be that if I have an opportunity to stop sharing my screen at some point while you're either hearing other testimony or when you start some discussion, if that's an important question, I can try to look.
I would like to see that map.
Yeah. So if you'll make a note to kind of maybe call me back on that one, okay. I'll search for it. I think that. With respect to noticing the business, I'm pretty sure that the MODA office received the public notice. I don't know who there would have opened the mail or how that would have been directed. And I know that with respect to apartments, it does depend a little bit on how, I guess, how the addressing is set up for that complex. I mean, sometimes we see that there isn't necessarily a real address for an office at the apartment, and so instead it is actually specific units within the complex that are receiving the notice. I think that just depends a little bit on the particular addressing for a specific site. But I can certainly look back at the list that we sent notice to and see kind of how it looked like it was handled in this case. And then I don't know if there's some additional specificity, or if you want to ensure that certain entities within the 300 feet are noticed. Maybe that's something you could.
Well, I think when it comes to deliberations, I would like to discuss with my fellow commissioners some ideas that I have. So I just wanted to know how that was getting at.
I mean, Brett, you could go back in the slides and pull it up, the noticing requirement under the code for, but it basically says the operator shall send a notice to neighbors within 300 feet. And I would interpret that to mean that individual units, the addressee, that however many, so it wouldn't just be the owner of the apartment building, it would be the individual units within 300 feet. And I would also think that definitely includes the owner of MODA. I mean, wherever the mailing address is out of the assessor's records. And I'm not sure that it goes 300 feet would be all the way up to Lava. I'm just
Right. It may not quite reach there.
But I would like to see the map, though. That'd be nice,
Okay.
please.
Brett, before you go off looking for maps, let me ask one question. The applicant has offered some mitigation proposals, which I'm certainly appreciative of. But how does the city ensure compliance with those owner offered mitigation issues?
Right. Well, and Denny, you can jump in here if you think I'm heading in the wrong direction. I think what's going to happen is, there was a proposal made for establishing the vacation rental. And it did include language suggesting that, limits would be set and certain other practices would be followed in terms of Wi-Fi cameras, that kind of thing. And so that does constitute the proposal. And I guess maybe where I'll ask Denny to help me speculate a little bit. I think what's going to happen if the vacation rental is approved as a conditional use, there's a conditional use permit that actually will be prepared by the city. It'll be signed by the city and the applicant that highlights the conditions there. I'm not sure that it would necessarily include a complete restatement of the entire proposal. So I think it's fair to understand that it may be that if there are not specific limits identified, for example, that it would really be up to, I guess you'd be depending on the owner or the operator of the vacation rental to be a good neighbor. I don't know if you'd want to get into setting specific number limits versus identifying the idea that there would be some kind of limit, and that if it was learned in a performance way down the road that no limits were being set, it may be that one could point back to the conditional use permit and say, hey, you're not running this the way that you said you would. But I don't know, between Denny and Justin, if either you want to speculate or kind of address that idea.
Yeah, Brett, I really think the approval, if the commission were to approve this tonight, whatever is written in that application, for the number of guests, the number of cars, whatever limitations are there, that's what we're approving. That's the upper limit. So I don't think we need to specify it. That was what was applied for. I think that's what we're approving. We're approving this particular proposal. Justin may have another opinion on that, but that's the way, as planning director, I would interpret it.
This is Justin, city attorney speaking. I would concur with Denny and further say that, any sort of conditional use permit, it's a complaint-driven system. So if they're not complying with their conditional use permit in a manner that triggers a complaint, they will be able to move forward and probably unscathed. But if a neighbor or somebody sees that they're not in compliance with their conditional use permit, they can file a complaint. Okay.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that the mitigation proposals are somehow codified, and that sounds like that's an appropriate answer.
If you wanted to make it clearer, it can be made a condition of the approval. But if you don't, I think we rely on the proposal itself to set those conditions.
Okay. Well, I'll poll the commissioners on that during our discussion.
Okay.
Any other clarifying questions for the staff from the commissioners? So have we received any correspondence on this matter?
We have not.
Okay. So I will now ask the applicant to give their comments on the application.
Okay, I am trying to promote Jeff Sturgis to a panelist status, and it's taking me a second to see if I can unmute. Oh, wait.
I think you have.
Can you
have.
hear me?
Yes. And
Yes,
do you have video as well?
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. You can share it. Okay. There you go.
Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Sturgis.
Thank you. I'll try and keep this brief and then open it up for any questions. Don't know if this will work against me or not, but I live in Atlanta, Georgia, so I'm going off of East Coast time. And but just a quick background, and Brett, I don't know if you have the ability to share your screen momentarily or briefly to just show the street view again of the property, because what I'd like to do is just give you very quickly a little bit of background on the history of our family. My father and my aunt, working with my grandmother representing her interests back in the 80s, were able to acquire this wonderful property in Milwaukee. And you can imagine how thrilled they were when they were able to find such a beautiful property right on the river. And their original vision was it was going to be a place where they could care for my grandmother. Unfortunately, she spent like less than 2-3 nights and then had a stroke, and so I didn't get to spend much time there. But that's when our family first moved to that area. And the home on the left that you see there of the picture, that actually was a home my aunt and my uncle built. When we originally bought it, there was a little brick house that came with the main house that you see there that was my parents. But then my aunt, they subdivided and took out the little brick cottage. And then my aunt and uncle built that house there on the left. And she lived there. She passed away just a year or 2 years ago. So we've got a long history there. My parents actually moved there in 1992, and they lived at Riverway from 92 until 2018 when health challenges resulted in them needing to move to independent living and then subsequently to assisted living. So that's a little bit of the background. And so in that 20, almost 30 years, I guess close to 30 years there, we obviously fell in love with the place and also have really enjoyed the greater Milwaukee community. And so as my folks moved out, and they now live down in Kaiser, just north of Salem, which is where my brother and sister-in-law live, one vision we had when we moved them out in 2018, which they initially moved to Tigard, was that we wanted to fix up the place. And what was intriguing for us about the short-term rental option was the idea that we could rent it out, generate income that would help support my parents, but then it also would have vacancies that would allow us to bring my folks back up to the property that they'd spent so much time at. And so we've been able to do that on a number of occasions since they moved out. And that's really the primary driver for us folks could come up. So anyway, that's a little bit about the history. When they moved out in February 2018, we went about a renovation. Nothing in terms of structural, but just total refurbishing of the main floor. It was, fairly dated, so everyth's been updated and put in new kitchen cabinets, everything. So probably put a total of $110,000 in upgrades just to get it top notch. And through I want to say middle of, losing track of time, 2018 was all construction, so it was vacant except my nephew lived there. And he lived there until last July, August. And so it was about that time that we started doing short-term rentals. And then we received a communication from the city about the need to do a short-term rental application. And we did have a family member living there. So I think we were within the spirit, but we started filling out the forms. And that's where we got a good education, thanks largely to Brett, on all the requirements and particular aspects of and options of what we would need to do to get this approved. And so ultimately that set us down a course which brought us to today. So our vision at this point, our desire is to have this where it's an operating duplex, where the bottom unit, as Brett mentioned, would be a long-term lease. And as Brett mentioned, our desire is to get a tenant who, in exchange for a discounted rent and a beautiful place on the river, would also take on some management functions for managing the upstairs and the short-term rental. Up to this point, I've managed, thanks to technology, I've managed a lot of the interactions with guests. But then my sister and brother-in-law, who live in Tigard, just off I-5, so they're about a 20-minute drive away, they take care of all the physical upkeep. So my brother-in-law over the last year and a half probably was over every other week in the wintertime, taking care of the yard, putting out the garbage, and things like that. And so he'll continue to be involved, but once we have a long-term tenant in the basement, we would offload some of that care, yards and putting out garbage and recycling, stuff like that. We'll offload that or transfer that to the tenant in the basement. In our application, there were questions about, how do we protect both the property as well as the neighborhood against some of the worst case stories we all hear about rentals. And, I can say I have rental properties down here in Georgia. My dad was in the rental business in Portland for 40 years. So even before such a thing as short-term rentals came on the scene, you had long-term rentals, and, there's long-term rentals don't always work out very well either. So you have to really put in place good policies, good practices, whether you have a long-term rental or a short-term rental, to ensure the property is protected and to protect your neighbors. And so to that end, we initially put a Wi-Fi camera in at Riverway on the riverside so that my parents in their retirement facility, they could live stream shots of the Willamette River. So they had a live stream flow where they could just watch the river, even though they were no longer on the river. So once we were done with the remodeling, we actually expanded that network of Wi-Fi cameras, all external. And so we have Wi-Fi cameras looking out at the river. We have it looking at the side yard to sort of the right of the property. We have a camera that looks out from the front door. We have a camera, you can't see it because it's blocked by the telephone pole, but there's a gate to the left of the garage. We have a camera that looks out that way. And then right on the left side of left of the garage, there's another camera there that covers the whole front. And so we actually, myself, my brother-in-law, my brother, we get pinged anytime there's motion activity. So we know, we see wildlife, we see contractors when they come, and it doesn't eliminate the need for having boots on the ground, but it is a helpful aid that gives us the ability to manage what's going on the property. So
Mr. Sturgis, this is Chair Massey. We've had about 9 minutes of testimony.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I would just ask you, let's go ahead and wrap it up.
Okay, I'm done.
That's very good. One more chance. I want to make sure you have a chance to have any closing comments, though.
I have no closing comments.
Okay, thank you for that.
For questions, yep.
At this point, I'll ask the commissioners if they have any clarifying comments for Mr. Sturgis. I see none at this
No
point.
comment.
Okay, getting a lot of head shakes here. So at this point, do we have anyone who wishes to speak about the application? And I believe that Mr. Klein is on the line.
Yes, I've just unmuted Gary.
Hi, this is Gary Klein. I'm on Zoom, so I've got a camera. So
Okay, let me promote you to the two panelists status here, and that'll allow you to share video. So just give me a second here. I think you can. I think you can probably share video now. I think
I just hit OK. I've never done this before. I apologize. I've lost everybody.
Don't apologize, Mr. Klein. We're kind of all new to this.
well, we can hear you.
Oh, okay, good. I keep hitting OK, but there it goes.
Okay, there we go.
We can see you now, Mr. Klein. Go ahead.
Okay. I don't have anything against or for, just information.
Hey, sorry, Gary, can you just state your name and address for the record?
Thank you. Gary Klein, 10795 Southeast Riverway Lane, Milwaukee, Oregon. I just have information that is not for or against, just information. Riverway Lane is a private driveway road street with less than 15 foot wide, with a dog leg in the middle at the south end near Sturgis, going north and south, and then it goes east and west at that point. Please, no parking in the roadway for the duplex folks. Also, all the mailboxes for all the homes from this point on Riverway Lane are across the street from the Sturgis. That's number one. Number two, the main power lines for the area are well over 130 years old. The oldest long-distance power lines in the U.S. Many other utilities are on these poles. There's 3 different power lines, a cable line, telephone lines, and other also. Different utilities come in to service these from time to time. Comcast has their main splitter box in front of the Sturgis for northwest Milwaukee, northwest Clackamas County. They park in Riverway Lane when servicing, thus things get tight in the corner. Please, no parking on the Riverway Lane from the duplex folks. We have a 2-inch water line, number 3. We have a 2-inch water line for Riverway Lane. That has been in place for over 72 years. This was set to be upgraded to a 6-inch water line over 6 years ago with a fire hydrant at the end. Then things got pushed back to 2021 or after. But as the last house on the water main, I got it pushed back to 2020 due to some water quality issues. Now I find out it has been delayed again to 2022 or after, last I heard. I hope no utilities have some other issues too. Riverway Lane at this time, all the houses on it are zoned single-family residence. There's no duplex or anything. So this is the first, but I know we're zoned R2. If you have any questions or comments, I can fill in anything here. The one thing about this is 300 feet from the home would go not all the way up to Lava Drive, as you so stated. Plus, there's another vacant lot between the Sturgis and the condos that is, close or at least 100 foot wide. And then immediately, if you go look at an aerial, you can see those 3 light buildings are all car parking. So there's nobody living there. Those 3 are car parking. Then if you go further left, those are finally getting into the apartments and the condos. So there's no physically people living that close. I'm closer in my home than those other apartments over there. The closest home is just to the north, and they own the lot that's next to them to the south, and that's vacant. If you have any questions, I'll try and fill you in. My family's owned this property since the mid to early 40s. We've lived here since 48. If you have any questions, I'll fill in. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Klein. Do any of the members of the Planning Commission have questions for Mr. Klein?
I've got a question, Chair Macy.
Go ahead.
Just to confirm, are we talking about the resident living at 10795 here, the furthest stretch of Riverway Lane? Is that what I heard?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh, also I want to mention, see the roadway that's just north of us there? If you look on the close-up of the aerial of the Sturgis property, I want to point one thing out. You were saying that he needed a new tree. See the tree that's just out of his property that shows there? That one. The Sturgis Bates and myself own that property. That is part of his property, as far as I'm concerned. I don't know why he needs another tree there. We have trees all over the place if you look at the thing. But I would say he's just fine with that tree there on the end of the road.
Thank you, Mr. Klein. So at this point, Mr. Sturgis, we offer the applicant another opportunity to provide any rebuttals or additional comments before we close the public testimony portion of the hearing.
I don't have.
Okay, sorry. I was just checking to make sure you're available to talk.
Yeah, I think I used my time to your earlier point, so I'm good unless there's questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sturgis. The public testimony portion of the hearing on application number CU-2020-001 is now closed. And I would ask.
Can I stop the sharing for a moment, and that'll give me a chance to look for the information that Commissioner Hemer wanted. But you can let me know if for your discussion. We'll go ahead and
start our discussions and see if you find anything that you want to interject. We'll hold for your report.
Oh well, yeah. Go ahead, and I'll look in the meantime.
Okay. I think we'll go ahead and just start the discussion with the commissioners while we give Brett a chance to look up that information. Any points to be raised?
So the reason why I want to see that 300-foot map is that the reason for the 300-foot rule, because most of these were in residential neighborhoods so that the residents could see it. So I don't see any reason why the applicant needs to notice MODA or to notice anybody in Waverly, because they're not really within that distance realm. I would say anybody that, lives on that street on Riverway and on Lava makes total amount of sense. But if you get into Waverly and to notice MODA, it seems like a living nightmare to constantly be chasing these things down. So I would like to say, within 300 feet except for MODA and any property on Waverly.
Greg, it's actually a code requirement, so you really can't waive it. It's just an ongoing code requirement, and it truly is not going to be that big an issue. There aren't that many units that are going to need to be noticed.
Hey, for what it's worth, can I share again and show you the notice map?
Please do.
Okay, so here you can see the dark circle is the actual literal 300 feet, but whatever tax lot it intersects at any point gets colored in as getting the notice. So this is the MODA property. And then this is what Mr. Klein was saying. These are the parking garages, but some of these units here, 1,400, are included in the notice. And I can let me share something else real quickly. Here is the mailing list of who received the notice and it's a combination of, owners who live at some of these unit addresses. But you can see the specificity of some of them, Unit 31, Unit 11, as well as notice went to residents. So this is cases where the owner lives somewhere else, but we sent a notice to the specific unit. So just to see the specificity, I think this mailing list was about just over 50.
Right, and so my point is, and I even if it's a code requirement, I don't know why we couldn't, be allowed to use our function to be able to limit this. Is that most of the times in these residential areas, 300 feet, you're talking 10 properties. Well, here we're talking 52 properties. A notice that needs to be sent out once a year, right? Isn't that what the code says?
Yes.
Right. And so because those properties at Waverly and Moda, which probably make up the majority of the 52, aren't really necessarily affected by the vacation rental. They don't use the street. They're not close enough to be able to hear the noise, or they're in an apartment type setting where there's natural, since it's higher density, there's more noise anyways. I think that it's an overburden on the applicant to have to send out 52 letters a year, when really all they need to do is send out 5 or 6. Is my feeling. And then I don't know why you need 2 trees. 1 tree by the pole would probably be fine. I don't know why you need 1 on the other side. Those are my 2 comments.
Any other commissioners have any comments?
Chair Macy?
Yes.
I was just in reviewing the application. My concern was just that the owner is out of state and, several states out of state. But being that there is no requirement and that the city really doesn't oversee that, I'm not sure that we have a position to hold. It does raise kind of an eyebrow, and if there's no local management team that's taking care of something and could be on site if there were some kind of an emergency or something that needed to be immediately addressed, that would be my concern.
Thank you. Commissioner Burns, anything to add?
I don't have anything to add. I think that, maybe a minor thing, Vice Chair Lisfeld, the owners, if I understand from the application, are in Kaiser, but Mr. Sturgis, who's their representative, is the one who's out of state. But doesn't really change your point.
Okay, well, yeah, I guess I was reading the application, which was filled out by Jeff. I understand.
I think it's his parents who are actually the owners of the property.
And Vice Chair Lozovel, we ran into this one before, if I remember this right. And correct me if I'm wrong, Justin, but we had a hard time defining what a property management or what property manager was by law in the state of Oregon and what it really meant. And so we kept away from the language of property manager, if I remember that correctly.
I don't recall bumping into this issue before, and I don't know where that term might be defined in the statutes. Certainly, you can have a short-term rental and have it operated by the family members with no management company whatsoever. Certainly, a private owner can hire somebody who can serve as a management company, take care of it. But I don't know that definition or who actually manages the property is any piece of criteria or consideration for the application.
If I recall correctly, the hearing that you're thinking of, Commissioner Hemer, I believe what we settled on was having the owner or their representative identify a local point of contact for the property. And we kept it as simple as it needs to be: someone who you could contact, who is included in the mailings and is on file with the city. And I think that would be a reasonable thing to do, in general for vacation rental conditional uses, as we've done in the past. And it would address Vice Chair Lisfeld's concern here. It seems like from reading the application and hearing Mr. Sturgis, that person might be the renter, the long-term renter on the property. That would be in keeping with what Mr. Sturgis said, and would be a really obvious, simple solution for having a local point of contact. You can't get more local than downstairs.
If I could jump in, the information that Brett presented at the beginning about the notice that goes out, again, what that includes is the property owner contact information, as well as the vacation rental operator and or property manager contact information. So we wrote that pretty broadly, and that came out of the hearing that you were referring to, Commissioner Heber, and we amended the code to add that language during one of our housekeeping fixes. But I think it's pretty broad, and that's intended to capture both whoever the official owner is, plus whoever might be operating locally, and whatever locally might mean there. It could mean Kaiser, the brother-in-law or brother, as well as the parents as the owners, but by perhaps Mr. Sturgis in Atlanta has an ownership share. That doesn't, and he would get the notice. I don't think that's important to the issue, as long as we can get a hold of somebody relatively close by to take care of things.
Commissioner Hemer, I would agree with you that maybe these notifications to this many people in the neighborhood may be a bit on the overkill side. But I would also caution against stepping back from anything that prevents information to going to the public who may be interested in this. And so I would rather not try to make decisions based upon exception to particular circumstances. If it's not an onerous burden, I guess I don't think that sending out 50 letters is an onerous burden. But I'll listen to other thoughts as well.
Chair Macy, I would agree with that position.
Also agree.
Any other? Go ahead.
I just also wanted to say that I agree with Commissioner Heemner's comment about the tree. It doesn't seem like an additional tree is necessary, and I would support that.
One tree by the telephone pole, but not across the driveway.
Okay. Do we think that we have reached a way forward and we could entertain a motion of sorts? Who would like to propose that motion?
I will, when we get to it.
Go ahead.
I'd like to make a motion to approve application CU 2020-001 and adopt the recommended findings and conditions of approval found in attachments 1 and 2, except for only asking the applicant to plant one tree by the pole and not on the other side of the driveway.
I'd like to second that motion.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. I think we have a decision. If anyone wishes to appeal this decision to the City Council, you must make application stating the grounds for your appeal within 15 days of the mailing of the notice of decision. Please contact the planning staff for details on any appeal. I don't believe that we have anything else on the agenda tonight.
Do not.
May I just say happy Mother's Day And happy birthday to Vice Chair Roosevelt.
I double second that emotion. Yeah.
Thank you.
So do the commissioners or staff have any other business items or updates they'd like to bring forward?
Just a reminder that you have June 9th free, unless you want to come to the council hearing on the comp plan.
We may join them by Zoom. Yeah.
I want to add one thing about that hearing that's being scheduled for June 2nd. Right now, what the city recorder is working on is having a in-person option as well as the video option. So the idea right now is to have a monitor in the fire bay at City Hall and have seats there so people who intend to address the council can be basically in a holding location, watching the presentation. There will be 3 counselors in the chambers plus a couple staff people. When it is time for the hearing to occur, those that wish to speak directly to the council will be allowed to go up into the council chambers, and then following that testimony, they would leave the council chambers and could then watch the deliberation either in that in the bay or head home and watch it, however they choose. But that's the tentative plan right now. So,
Denny, is that? Oh, are we raising our hand?
No, go ahead.
Denny, is that a first come first serve kind of? Are they limiting reservations of 25 or less, or like?
We haven't figured that out yet, but my guess is I might be wrong, but most people will want to testify through the same system we're using here. I mean, I'm not sure. I wouldn't be the first one that would want to go. Be there in person.
Well, so this is where I'm confused, right? I mean, so according to the governor's rules, and depending on when Clackamas County puts in their application, right, it's 3 weeks or whatever to gather up to 25 people, but still it's 10 or less. So if that does not happen by June 9th, then there's no way you can do that, right?
Yeah, Justin may want to chime in, but I think we have the flexibility to determine how we want to operate that hearing.
Is there really that big of a rush to get this done?
It's sort of holding up the work on moving to the next stage, implementing the comp plan.
Well, I understand that, but we know how passionate the people were that testified with us, and I'm sure that they're going to want to testify with city council as well. I mean, that's at least 2 meetings. Plus, with doing the Zoom, it takes a little bit longer to kind of get everybody in and out. So I'm worried about the crunch of the timeline and the rush that the city is putting this through. I know that this is really odd times, and I would hate to take away rights of people to assemble and address their government, especially on a plan that's going to last 20 or 30 years.
Well, I think that's part of the reason the council wanted to have an in-person option as well as the online option.
It just seems like to me that when it opens up a little bit, that you could have the hearing, but I guess it's up to you guys.
I think there's a greater fear that it may be shut down again, and when do we have that opportunity to have the in-person testimony? We might be in better shape right now than after this if we end up having a second wave of infections.
Okay, I mean, that's a fair reason.
the commissioners have any other items for discussion?
Greg, I'd like to know whether or not styrofoam collection is still happening.
So the styrofoam collection is down right now. There's a couple of reasons for that. Exceed Enterprises, who runs it, is kind of government funded and runs through nonprofits, and they had huge supply and, like everybody else, huge supply chain problems. So they've been focusing on their business. But we've been using the time to retool this and get a little bit more organized so that it can probably stay in Milwaukee for future generations.
Thank you.
Any other items of discussion from the commissioners? Again, Mr. Sturgis and Mr. Klein, thank you for your testimony tonight. I know that we've gone through a forecast of meetings in the future. Is there any other forecast items, Mr. Egner?
We are expecting the railroad subdivision to come back to the next meeting, and then in the second, well, what will be your only meeting in June, we're expecting to have a hearing on a height variance for a mixed-use building on 32nd Avenue, 32nd and Olson. That's what we've got.
With that, I don't think we have anything else on the agenda, and I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Can I add one more comment?
Please do.
I hope while conducting interviews, you all will be looking for equity amongst our group here.
Will do.
I wouldn't mind to even up the score and find some folks that don't look like the rest of us.
We will certainly try to do that.
Thank you. I motion that we to end the meeting. Adjourn.
Second.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Be
Good
safe.
to see you all.
Okay, guys.
Bye.
Have a good night. Stay safe out there.